God, may the words of my mouth and may the meditations of our hearts together be acceptable in your sight. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I wonder if any of you know about Father Greg Boyle. Any of you know him? He's a Catholic priest in the Boyle Heights neighborhood in East Los Angeles, served there for many years. He is the founder of Homeboy Industries. Maybe you haven't heard of him? Oh, well, I'm happy to tell you about him. He is one of my heroes. So Boyle Heights, this neighborhood in East Los Angeles, it still is, and especially in the 80s and 90s, was known as the gang capital of the world. Greg Boyle arrived in the neighborhood in 1986, and when he arrived, he was absolutely stunned by the level of violence in the community. And in 1992, actually, there were over 1,000 gang-related murders in Los Angeles. And so when Greg Boyle arrived in that area, he felt he could not do anything constructive in the community until he negotiated a truce among the gangs. The gangs had to stop fighting. They had to stop killing each other. And he devoted himself to building relationships with the leaders of the gangs and getting them finally, after years of work, to talk with each other. And he did successfully negotiate a truce, and the truce lasted for a few months, and then something happened, some dispute arose again, and the violence began to escalate again. And this happened time and time again. With the help of Father Boyle, the gangs would negotiate a truce, and then there'd be conflict. It would go back and forth and back and forth. And after several years of this, after quite a few years of this, Greg Boyle had sort of an aha moment. And he realized that all of the work that he was doing, his peacemaking work, his work that focused on resolving conflicts, that all of that work was really just serving to legitimize the very meaningless disputes between the gangs, that all of the energy he was putting into the conflict resolution was actually perpetuating the conflict. The violence, he realized, the violence in his community was not actually the result of the conflicts that he was negotiating. He realized that the violence was the result of what he called a lethal absence of hope. And so this discovery led Father Boyle to completely shift his focus, to shift the focus of his work. He stopped any direct engagement with the gangs at all. And instead, he founded this thing, Homeboy Industries, which is actually now a series of businesses. It started with a bakery, but now it expanded. It now includes a silk screening company, a landscaping company, a graffiti removal company, a tattoo removal company. And all of these things are staffed and powered by rival gang members who work together side by side to do the work, to run the businesses. Now, all of this work, all of these businesses, along with the educational programs and the counseling services that Homeboy Industries also includes, all of this invites the young men and the young women of Boyle Heights to, as Greg Boyle says, stop planning their funerals and start planning their futures. He has this phrase I love: nothing stops a bullet like a job. It's proved, Homeboy Industries and all of the work they do has proved to be just about the most successful gang intervention program ever created. Now, why mention Greg Boyle? Well, I think most of us approach problems the way that Greg Boyle did when he first started his work. I think most of us, when we encounter a problem and want to solve it, we go directly at the problem. We go where the trouble is. If we see somebody bleeding, well, ask the EMT. What do? Stop the bleeding, bandage the wound. If we see somebody who's hungry, well, ask those of us who work for Focus, what do? We feed the people, right? If we see people who are fighting, who are in conflict, well, we want to help them resolve that conflict. We want to help them learn to get along. And you know what? We have a word for all of that work. We call it realistic. We call it being pragmatic. We call it being direct. We call it being a problem solver. And that is the approach that Mary Magdalene and Joanna and the other women take after Jesus is crucified. Jesus' body needs to be prepared for burial. That is a problem. And there is nobody else to do it. And so the women go to the tomb. They go there with the purpose of solving the one problem in this whole story that they can solve. We can do this. We can prepare the body for burial. But instead of encountering Jesus' dead body, they encounter an angel. And the angel asks these women a most surprising question. What does the angel ask? Why do you look for the living among the dead? Ask it with me, will you? Why do you look for the living among the dead? How do the women respond? Well, Luke doesn't actually record their response. They don't have an answer, at least in Luke's version of the gospel. And to be honest, I don't think they had an answer in the moment itself. I mean, after all, they were not looking for the living among the dead. They weren't looking for the living. They were looking for the dead, right? Which is exactly why they went to a tomb equipped with embalming spices. They go there looking for a dead person who needs to be embalmed. That is their focus. That is their purpose. But the angel redirects their attention. Do not look for the dead, the angel tells them. Do not let that be your focus. Look for the living. And that shift in attention leads those women out of that tomb and back into community, bursting with a story that needs to be told. Do not give your attention to the dead. Look for the living. Oh, now there's a message. There's a message that is great to say and awfully hard to enact. Because friends, death grabs our attention like nothing else. Death is undeniable, non-negotiable, unavoidable, be it the death of a loved one or the death of a dream, the death of an organization, the death of a relationship. Sometimes it feels like death is the only sure bet we can make, the only thing we can really count on. In contrast to death, hope for the future, resurrection, the promise of life everlasting, all of that, well, it feels purely hypothetical. These things feel like they're made up out of wishes and hopes and fantasies. They're all just sweet distractions, and they serve the purpose of giving us some sense of relief, but in the end, all they do is give us a little break from the reality of death. Death is what's real. But here's the thing. When the angel told the women to shift their attention, to look for the living, the angel was not just trying to distract these women. It wasn't just trying to give them something to cheer them up. The angel was not trying to engage them in wishful thinking. He was telling them that death is real, but it is not the only thing that is real. As important as death is, it is not the most important thing. As powerful as death is, it's not the most powerful thing. Life is what is real. Hope is what is important. And promise is what has power. But don't take my word for it, the angel says. Go and see. Go and see for yourselves. Pay attention to resurrection, and you will discover just how amazing life is. For 2,000 years, Christians have been trying to get their head around Jesus' resurrection. They've looked for ways to understand it as a physical reality, as a metaphysical reality, as a sign, as a symbol, as a metaphor. But at risk of being probably overly simplistic, I think basically this first interpreter, this first theologian, the angel at the tomb, I think that angel pretty much got it right. The resurrection is a big, flashing arrow meant to direct our attention. Look at this, look at this, look at this, Easter says. It says, in short, look beyond the tomb, look beyond death, look beyond disappointment and loss and violence and guilt and pain. There is something else that demands your attention, resurrected life. And you're not going to find it in the tomb. So the question this day, every day is, where are we looking? Where are we looking? Do you find yourself looking for the living among the dead? Do you find yourself going back time and time again to the tomb, to the things that happened long ago, to the things that are already dead? Do you find yourself mired in the management of problems? Do you find yourself focused on all that's wrong in the world, all that's wrong in your family, all that's wrong in the city, all that's wrong in your job, all that's wrong in your head? Do you find yourself struggling, as Greg Boyles says, with a lethal absence of hope? If so, then the angel's question is for you. It's for me. Why do you look for the living among the dead? What would it mean to shift our focus? Would we then, like the women in this story, become witnesses to the resurrection? What would it be like to shift our focus? Well, if you want to know, ask someone who's tried it. Ask Greg Boyle in East Los Angeles. Ask the man that I met who decided to stop thinking about when his cancer was going to relapse and got very focused in all sorts of creative ways to spread joy among other people with a cancer diagnosis. Ask the prisoner I know who decided to stop beating herself up for all of the choices that she had made in the past and became a trainer in a program that teaches other inmates nonviolent conflict resolution. Ask the prosecutor I know who is spending more and more of her time with community-based alternatives to incarceration. Ask Rahimi, the father of the Afghan refugee in our congregation who has been matched with us through USCRI's Good Neighbor program. I told Rahimi this week the news I had heard that the New York Capital Region will soon be home to 500 or more Ukrainian refugees. I told Rahimi I was worried about how this was going to work, knowing that our resettlement agencies are already so incredibly overtaxed and really having trouble serving the needs of the 411 Afghan evacuees who have arrived here since November. I was fretting about this, and Rahimi smiled and told me, with all of these Afghans, this city is more ready than ever to welcome refugees. We know what it's like to be a refugee. We will welcome them. Or if you want to know what it's like to shift your attention from death to resurrection, ask my dad. Ask my dad. My father lost his mother many years before she died. Her memory was nearly completely erased by the time she was in her mid-70s. And my father had always assumed that she would die long before my grandfather. But both of them good Quaker farm stock. Both of them lived well into their 90s. And then my grandfather, who was a fiercely stubborn and independent person to the end, well, he died unexpectedly, as unexpected as it can be when you're like 93, but he died suddenly. And my father realized that he now was going to have to make his periodic visits to Pennsylvania and just visit his mother, who was in a nursing home. She was living in a locked Alzheimer's unit of a lovely, lovely Quaker nursing home, smiling, pleasant, but totally unable to recognize him, carry on a conversation. So my dad went out, and that first weekend he went out, was there for a whole weekend visit. We found it incredibly boring, incredibly depressing. Couldn't wait to go back home. And then when it came time for him to visit again, he realized that he really, really had to do something different. So he spent the next weekend, the whole entire next weekend, observing the staff on the unit. He watched them interact with the residents of the Alzheimer's ward, listening to the language that they used, the tone of voice they used, noticing the activities that they initiated. He watched one staff person get a whole group of residents, my grandmother included, to hit a beach ball back and forth to each other. And my grandmother laughed and laughed and laughed, and my father, on a whim, inserted himself into the game. And before he knew it, he was laughing right along with his mother, which is something that he hadn't done for years and years. So the next time he visited, he brought my grandmother a stuffed rabbit, long fur and long floppy ears. And he held the rabbit and he petted it and he cooed over it and he handed it to her. And she cradled it in her arms like a baby and giggled and loved on it. He led the whole Alzheimer's unit in singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" one weekend. He brought feathers that tickled. He brought flowers that smelled good. And you know, he did not heal my grandmother's Alzheimer's, but he found a way to form a relationship with her despite her illness. And he realized that his relationship had died, but then he realized that when he stopped focusing on what had died, he found resurrection. And the story doesn't end there. As some of you know, my father, who had a PhD in chemistry and worked as an industrial chemist all his life, went back to night school at community college. And by the time that he retired, he had earned his RN and he got a job. Post-retirement, he went and worked as a staff nurse at a home for men who were living on respirators. And he went there with a mission. His mission was to help people who thought their life had ended, to help them to find new life, to stop looking for the living among the dead. Friends, resurrection can be such a hard thing to believe in. But in the end, the point of Easter, the point of all of this, the choir and the flower and the rooms and all of this, the point of this story and this morning's celebration is not to get you to believe something. Belief isn't what's going to change your life. It's not going to change the world. Resurrection starts to make a difference when it moves from a concept to a practice, which is to say, a way to walk each step, a way to face each day, a way to respond to every challenge that you face in life. The practice of resurrection begins and ends with attention. And so we come back to this question: why are you looking for the living among the dead? Why are we looking for the living among the dead? Sensible as it may seem, we are not going to solve the world's problems by tending to the tombs. Look to Jesus. Look to where he is pointing. Look to life eternal, love everlasting, hope that reaches out and pulls us out of the tomb and sends us out of the room we are in with a story to proclaim, with a message to tell, with a promise to share. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen.